And if I have any advice for anybody who's building a business, if you think you can avoid hard decisions and build a business over a long term, you just can't. And be quick to make hard decisions, because in the end, they're awful, they're terrible, but when you've done them, the benefits should be there and you can grow back. And I genuinely think, had we not done it, I certainly wouldn't be talking to you.
Colin Culliton, thank you very much for coming in.
You're very welcome.
It's a pleasure to have you, and it's a lovely rainy day outside, so it wasn't exactly easy to come in.
And it was lovely to be asked. And it's funny, things like this are coming along now later in my career, and I have to say I really enjoy them, and I'll do anything I can to get people to think about maybe starting their own business or looking at that as an option for themselves, and I'm more than delighted to do today.
Well, let's go back to the start then, and the start of your own business, because I heard you say before that you essentially started what you called a Me Too printing company. And so I just kind of want to hear about your motivations really for doing that, and what was the kind of inspiration?
So I used to go around saying to people that I was going to be a successful businessman when I was a kid. And as I got into my career, I wasn't being hugely successful. And while I was doing the job well, I wasn't being very well rewarded for it. And I often thought to myself, I would love to be my own boss. So I actually wanted to start a business rather than start a print and design business. I had no grow for that industry, but was an industry I was more than happy to give it a go. A lot of people seem to think that actually you need some eureka moment or some really good idea that nobody else has thought of. My experience is most businesses are just tweaks or changes on something that was already there. In my case, the print business was a very established, very kind of, it tended to be run in families, and it tended to be, um, medium-sized businesses were where most people got to, and that's certainly what I was hoping to get to when we started. But when I say it was a Me Too business, there was nothing different I was doing that other people weren't doing. We had very similar machinery that you leased. We had a factory that was just like any other factory. It was only 3,500 square feet. It was tiny, but we were very proud of it. And we started doing exactly the same thing as other people. But I thought we could do it quicker, and I thought we might be able to do it with a little bit more flair and a little bit more innovation. And that was what we were trying to tell the marketplace. And it was a slow start. Like year one, we turned over 400,000 euros. And when I think about that now in a year, I'm actually kind of embarrassed that that was my best effort. But truthfully, it takes a while to establish a business, and it takes a while for people to take you seriously. And we had to prove to blue chip companies that we were good enough to basically take over from someone else who was very good at their job. So we had to kind of prove ourselves with small jobs and then build from there. So we had a good list of customers after a year, but they were giving us only small amounts of their work. So it wasn't hugely problematic to grow within that. And we were very lucky that we had a company called CNC, which is Britvic, and they gave us work from the very beginning. Actually, the very first job I did was a Pepsi job for them. I remember it was a wobbler. That's something you put on a shelf in a supermarket. And it was promoting Rod Stewart concert. And I remember thinking about our winning tickets for a Rod Stewart concert. And I remember thinking, if I can get more of that kind of business, those kind of clients, it'll be an ever increasing circle. So that's why I like the print and design business, because if you got a client and you did a good job, you tended to keep them. So year one, we might have had 30 clients. Year two, we had 45 clients. Year three, we had 60 clients, and we were able to grow it that way.
Why an established business? So even getting a customer like CNC, who are a big Irish company, right? Much
Yeah.
bigger now, probably.
Yeah.
But that must have been challenging, given how many competitors were in the industry.
Sure, and it's a funny thing. There's a kind of a thing with trust, that sales is not about being a good talker or basically having a kind of shiny briefcase and a suit. It's about actually building trust with somebody. And what I was able to do was I was able to go into people. In the case of CNC that I got first working for other people, I went into a guy called Michael O'Rourke, who's passed now, but he was a lovely guy. And I pitched to him that I was very good at my job. I was working for a company called Marksell, and they were very good at their job. And would he give us a try? And on the first job that we quoted, we were cheaper than the existing supplier. We were a good bit cheaper, a couple of grand cheaper. But what happened was, and it was a big job, and he said, Colin, I can't give you that one. It's too big a job. It was a coupon book for all of their brands, and it was very high profile. And he was afraid to give us that. So he said, but I promise you, I'll give you something else. Two things happened. He kept his promise, but also the other guys screwed up and didn't do a nice job on the coupon book. So we came in as the next supplier, and I had every bit of Club Orange work from then on from him. And eventually I wore out his brand manager in Pepsi and got his work. And then from there we grew, and they bought Ballygowan, and we started doing Ballygowan work and grew it that way. But actually I do remember there was a moment when Michael said to himself, I'm going to give this kid a try. And that was the reason we got that business. And I took that business from my existing employer into the new business, and they were 60% of our turnover year one.
And why business? So I heard you say before, and you also said it there a second ago, that when you were a kid, you always was saying, I'm going to be in business and I'm going to be a successful business person. Why was that?
Quite simply because my hero was my dad, and he was a businessman, and I just thought he was cool, and I always wanted to be like him. It was as simple as that. And so I used to go into work, like I used to go into school with his old briefcase, like a banged up old version of his briefcase, and people used to slag me, but I didn't care. I'd go, you know what, I'm going to be a businessman. And to me, the business just seemed less important than actually just being a successful businessman was what I wanted to be. He worked in CRH. He started as a clerk in a pit quite near where we live in Fassaro. And basically he went from there to being the boss of the business at 36, and he had a great career. And that to me was the kind of thing that I was trying to do. But funny enough, I knew I wasn't as bright as him, so I actually thought maybe I'd be better in a smaller business than a bigger business. And that's how it's turned out. I've ended up with we grew our businesses reasonably big, and I think in 2019 all the businesses combined, if you counted the intertrading between them, was just touched 20 million euros. So we got to a decent size, but I don't think I ever would have suited a multinational PLC. I just don't think I had that skill set. I think I was better personal to person and working with people rather than having departments and working with departments.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because even your dad had a slightly different skill set
Yeah.
from who he took over at CRH,
Yeah.
right? Who was kind of Tom, what's his
Tom
name?
Roach, yeah.
Tom Roach, right? Who was more of a starter than a.
Completely. And actually, funny enough, I was lucky enough to have spend some time with a guy called Donal Roach, who was Tom's brother, and he was our first chairman in TPI, in the printed image. And he was a chairman for a year, and he did something quite funny. After a year, he said to me, rang me up, but he said, Colin, I'm going to step off the board. And I thought I'd done something wrong. So I was going, were our meetings not good, or were the agendas not proper? I was kind of a bit thrown because I was only 25. And he said to me, not at all. He said, you're doing everything right. You're too small to be having quarterly board meetings. I want you to do exactly what you're doing over and over again, and come back to a chairman or a non-executive director when you're a little bit bigger, because you don't need to be spending your time doing that. Spend your time on the business. And he wasn't in any way patronizing or anything like that. He said, it's on the right track. I'm putting it in the right place, and I know what I'm doing. But he told me all about Tom Roach, and Tom Roach was an amazing guy. He basically was an entrepreneur to his fingertips. And what he did was he was able to just look at an opportunity and make it into a business. And my dad told me one time he went off for lunch and he came back and he bought a factory, and they all had to move to this factory because he'd seen something that was well priced on the Nace Road. I think they might still be there. And there's a big plant on the Nace Road beside an airstrip. And what I would say is, I think my dad was the complete opposite of him. He was the exact right guy to take over from him, because Donald told me that Tom wasn't the same guy when he didn't know everyone that worked for him. He said when he knew every person that worked for him, he was absolutely the best in the world. But as the company got bigger and he had companies that he didn't know the people in, he wasn't as effective.
It's a very, I'd say, almost wise insight for a 25-year-old to kind of know that about themselves. And I
Yeah,
don't know whether
yeah,
this is related, but I was going to ask you about confidence, right?
yeah,
Because you're dyslexic,
yes,
and in school, I think oftentimes people with dyslexia are confidence can be an issue because of maybe how teachers have spoken to them and things like that. That it hasn't seemed to impact you. Maybe you'll correct me on that. But also, you also had that insight as to, I'm not my dad, but I can do it kind of in my own
yeah,
way.
exactly. So I thought I could see he had different skills to me. We were quite different in some ways. People say to me sometimes we're very alike, but we were very different in terms of the way we'd approach a problem. So he's the kind of guy that would sit down with you, take out a pen and paper and say, okay, what's the issue we're talking about? And he would literally take notes as you were talking as a kid. Like, he was incredible. He used to leave notes for us on the breakfast table with things that we might think about or want to do, or like, it was just so good. It was so great to grow up in that house. But what I would say is I knew from the off that I was totally different. And I was very lucky with the dyslexia because there was two teachers. There was a teacher called Miss Simpson in Pres in Bray, and there was a teacher called Miss McFarland in St. Gerard's that I moved to a smaller school. Like, when I was in Pres, I was one of 46 boys. Can you imagine what that was like? So 46 and then 42 in the year after. So it was like a zoo, like, not in the year, in the class. So my parents felt that I was struggling a little bit, and I was struggling. But Miss Simpson and then Miss McFarlane both said, he's bright, but he's just not able for what's going on. Maybe there's something wrong there. So I got tested quite early, and I got a badge saying I was dyslexic at about, I don't know, 9. So that made a difference for me because I was able to say, well, there is a reason why I'm like this. I was absolutely brilliant at maths, and I was absolutely terrible at English and Irish and French. I was so bad at spelling. It was incredible. So getting a reason for that helped a lot. And then the other thing is, I've always described this, especially to kids, when I talk in schools. Sometimes I'm lucky enough to get asked to go and judge the junior entrepreneur stuff, and it's really good and so fun. But what I would say is, when I say to the kids, I say to the kids, are any of you dyslexic? And the amount of hands that go up, it's about, I think it's about 20%. So basically what happens is I say to them, look, it's a superpower when you get out from under school. It's really hard in school and in college because it makes everything much more difficult. But when you get into the real world, you'll see solutions to things that nobody else will see. You'll think about things differently to others, and it really does make a difference. It's a superpower. So if you think about it as something good, it becomes much easier to deal with it. And I think early enough, I said, that's why I'm this. That's why I'm the worst in the class at this and the worst in the class at that. I did start knocking around and still knock around with a lot of messers because I wasn't near the top of the class. I was very near or at the bottom of the class. But the other side of that was, when I came into the real world, I was very comfortable with problem solving. I never once had a problem going, there's a way out of this. I could always say, I drive my kids mad when they come home with some real problem. And I go, well, I'll start going into solution mode when they don't want you to. They want you to listen. And I'm sort of going, okay, sorry. But that's what dyslexia gave me. It's definitely a problem solving skill, alongside a huge drawback when you're trying to write a 12-page history essay.
Yeah, I'm involved with this group, the Entrepreneurs Organization, here in Ireland,
I
and
know them.
yes,
I
yeah,
was on the board there.
oh, well, there you go.
Yeah,
Okay, so there you go.
they're
And
super.
yeah, absolutely, amazing group,
Big
and
week for them this week.
exactly, yeah, the GLC is on Friday, so I'm looking forward to that. And we had an on-site with Barry Napier from
Yes,
Cubic Telecom,
another great guy.
and he made the point during that he said, and it's an anecdotal kind of observation that he's made, but many entrepreneurs that he has seen, and he himself is dyslexic, and and it kind of, if you look at Richard Branson and
Yeah.
things like that, it really does seem to have um uh it's almost kind of intertwined with this kind of entrepreneurship thing for some reason.
And I think the better people understand it, the more they realize that it is a particular thing. It is a real thing. It's not made up. I know some people think it's there for leaving certain points or whatever. I'm telling you, it's a real thing. But the other side of it is, there's an awful lot of upside to it. And I think as we get to understand our own brain power and human brain power more, we'll see that actually alternative thinking is the key to problem solving in the future. I would have no problem at all in taking somebody who's a bit left field, a little bit different. When I was taking on creatives, I was taking on nutcases, lovely guys, lovely girls, but sometimes they would think about things totally differently than I would. But that was absolutely fine with me. And I think I did learn from my own dyslexia that a team should be made up of different types of people. It shouldn't be made up of what you are, because you're just going to get basically people agreeing with you. And it shouldn't be made up of any particular type. If you have a mix, like 4 or 5 different personality types, the way they do the colors, if you can get different color people in a room, the amount of problem solving that goes on, because businesses, especially small and medium sized businesses, there's always a crisis. Like, you're only 2 months away from some problem. Like, for example, your best customer will just stop dealing with you. It happened to us. you have to come around and think, how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to solve this? And I think having different voices at the table is a huge thing. And also having a culture that allows those voices to be heard is really important as well. Like, I would love to think that the people that work with me felt very comfortable walking into my office and going, you're wrong about that, or I think you should think about this, or can we do it this way? I would love to think that we always had that culture. I think we did.
Before you got larger to the point where culture might have been kind of more relevant, you started off with this Me Too
Yeah.
printing company. How many people were it?
Six of us.
6 people. Okay, so you started a business with 6 people, age
Yeah,
25 or
to just turn 25.
right,
Yeah.
okay, so early 20s. I
Yeah.
mean, it's kind of an impressive thing, but talk to me about the first, 10 or so years. When did you first make it the acquisition, the first
Yes,
acquisition?
so that was about 4 years in. So we started off and we basically had 6 people. And the way we did it was, when we had nothing to do, we'd clean the windows, and we had the cleanest windows in the whole of Ireland. I'm not joking. It was unbelievable how often we cleaned the windows. And the funny thing was, the guys on the factory floor were able to look in at me, so they'd go like, "What the feck is he doing?" So I'd have to grab the phone and start ringing people, because I'd have guys looking in going, "Where's the work?" And they'd left good jobs in good companies to work for me, which was a great vote of faith in me. But what ended up happening was, we grew slowly and surely. And then after about 4 years, I had noticed, well, two things happened. One, we won Printer of the Year, Small Printer of the Year, and Overall Printer of the Year 3 years in, which was unheard of. A Small Printer of the Year had never won the big thing. And so that was really helped us move. But it did seem to me that even with the growth that we were making and the progress we were making, we were probably up to about maybe 15 or 16 people by the end of that year. I knew myself I wanted to go further, faster. I had a feeling that the bottom might start getting chopped away in the business, and I wanted to be bigger. So I approached a company called McGill Print, and I actually asked twice through intermediaries, would he consider selling to me? And twice I got the message back, never, not on your Nelly. Who told you I was selling? This kind of thing. Quite an angry response from the owner, Alec McGill. But eventually he came to the table and we kind of engineered a deal, and he hated the look of it when we put it to him. So it was a way of him getting money off the table, which was involved his factory and a few different things. A bit complicated because it was quite a small business, but about the same size as us. So we were basically doubling in size if I could get the deal over the line. And Alec, being careful, said he would do 3 years and no more. I was determined to keep him in the business because I knew he was the business and I wanted him in. So we agreed 3 years was long enough. He ended up working for 20 years, becoming our chairman and being a really important part of our business going forward. So he's wasn't just a great acquisition. Having Alec there beside me was such a good thing, because when I was like, a bull in a china shop, he would calm everyone down. He was so gentlemanly and thoughtful about the way he would deal with people. Everyone loved him. Literally everyone loved him. And he was a great guy. He was a great guy to have on the board and in the business. But when we did the deal, I knew myself that we needed to basically grow, and that started us on a path of growth. And I think from then on, we never looked back. And again, a few years later, I bought out the shareholders in my business. Took years, was really difficult, really painful journey. But at the end of that journey, about a year after that, they came to me and said they'd sell their business. Now, the interesting thing about their business was we'd got to about 6 million turnover and they were about 6 million turnover. So it was a very similar sized business. We had about half the marketing print market and they had about the other half. So it was a great big job to do, but it was very difficult for this reason. They had been investors in our business at the beginning and they had sold out. So I guess them coming back around to sell to me was difficult. And in fairness to them, they came to me and said, do you want to buy it? But the deal was very, very fraught and it was very, very difficult. And then the year that they did after they sold it wasn't a walk in the park, because I guess I'd worked for them years before and now they were kind of feeling maybe that they were working for me. And I tried to avoid any conflict, but in the end, I was ready for them to leave. And I knew that this business was good enough that we could combine them together and make something better. But we did do something which I did think was clever. We didn't rush to bring them together. The accountant said to me, put them together, make cost savings, cut heads, you'll make more money. I said, no, I want to learn what they do and how they do it. And I want to make sure that we make both cultures are respected. And when we brought them together, we brought both companies into a new business, a new building, a new factory. And so we brought both the businesses together. And in fairness, some of those people, they did leave over time. But when they did move, we didn't make any cuts. We didn't cut any headcount or anything like that. We tried to take the best of both businesses and grow them together.
When you first started, you said, "Oh, I'd like to get up to kind of a medium-sized
Yeah.
business." Did
Yeah.
you have acquisitions in your mind at that stage?
Not really. I was hoping to grow organically, but what happens with organic growth is it becomes very slow and it becomes kind of frustrating. It seems to take forever. So what you end up with is, I know it's different in software where you might have a new product and you'll be able to shoot through the stars, whatever. But what we found was we were in a steady industry and growth rates were between 10 and 20% in terms of turnover in the year. The other thing I did, which I tried to do for every year and did for I think 29 years, was we ended up making sure we were profitable. So we wouldn't just grow and lose money the way that would be very, very much the thing now. So if you were starting a business now, you probably expect to lose millions for a few years before you got somewhere scalable. Whereas we were trying to make money every year and grow. So it was by nature quite slow and kind of steady. And I was getting frustrated with that. So I was glad when we bought those businesses because it gave us a bit of scale. And then when we had a bit of scale, we looked at our industry and we thought, our industry is commoditizing. We're not as important as we used to be. People don't think of us the way they used to think of us. We used to be brought in early into a marketing campaign. We used to be brought in yearly to talk to purchasing and the marketing department about what we would do for them in the year. We were becoming more and more a commodity. So I started looking around and thinking maybe we should use businesses that are outside of just print and design and get a communications group rather than just be a printer or a printer and a designer. Like, to give you an example of how weird the thinking was then, when you were a printer, you were never supposed to be a designer as well, because the idea was all the designers and ad agencies wouldn't deal with you if you added on design. And I thought, that's nonsense. I'm going to add on design because we need to get design quickly and we need to give the client what they want, which is a one-stop shop for print design. Then we added Premia, publicity gifts or merch as it's called. We added that because we found that people were suffering with bad delivery times and bad reliability. So we might be doing, say, a World Cup campaign where there was 100,000 footballs being given away. The footballs wouldn't arrive. So we started doing that kind of work, and that's how we were growing. But we were still saying to ourselves, maybe we need something outside of that. So we bought a small agency called Runway Marketing, which was kind of a below the line agency, a shopper marketing agency. And then we bought an events business called Pluto, which has become a full service advertising agency. And then we started a business called TAP, which was kind of an environmental design business. And all of those were efforts to get outside our core business and be a bit more of a kind of a wider menu for the clients.
So when you talk there about not integrating things maybe straight away, what way did that all kind of shake out? Did you leave a lot of there's different brands there, obviously. Did you leave a lot of the businesses separate or
Yes.
did you bring them in
No,
together?
we looked at bringing them together, but a lot of the time we found the skill was and the skill set was different, and there was a lot of good in the companies that we had. So I don't think we would have done a huge amount by bringing them all together into one big company. And again, a bit back to the dyslexia, I would think differently to everyone else. So when people said to me, bring them together, cut 20 jobs, all that, I would always go, no, no, what we're going to do is we're going to keep them separate. We're going to grow them. And then if it's right, we'll bring them together. So in some cases we did bring them together, but in most cases we kept them separate. And actually, as it has gone on, it has become clear that that was the right thing to do for a lot of those businesses because they're quite unique and different. And actually, the customer base is different in the different businesses. So there's not the same correlation that maybe I thought there was when we started this.
Was it challenging for you with having kind of a lot of separate businesses, maybe different strategies in each? Was that a challenge at any
Yes,
stage?
and it's a challenge I'm not certain I've quite I conquered, if I'm honest. That's the truth. I think when I was running a business, I could see everything about the business and I was very comfortable about that. Whereas when I was in a situation where I had to delegate to a good managing director, I had to trust that managing director was going to knock it out of the park the way I would have wanted them to. And that took a little bit of learning, and it's still a work in progress for me. But I genuinely try and leave the managing directors of the businesses to do what they do well and try and be helpful and thoughtful and very supportive when things are going wrong. And as I said to you, you're never more than a couple of months away from something going wrong in a small or medium-sized business, and you have to accept that. And sometimes all the managing director needs is a little bit of time to hear themselves explaining how unfair and how difficult it is, and then getting to the solution phase and then getting in and doing it. And I have to say, I have learned that jumping in and trying to solve other people's problems for them isn't always the best way for them or for you. I think people are best off. The people closest to the decision making and the problem will do better if their decisions are being implemented. And clearly, if they're getting them wrong again and again, you've got the wrong person. But if you've got the right person, to be honest with you, their instincts are correct. And actually, do you know what I've found over the years? I'm 40 years in business, I think 41 next year. I found the little voice inside people's heads or inside me is nearly always right. What goes wrong is you don't always hear it clearly or you don't listen to it and you do the opposite. So an awful lot of people's business instincts are correct, but their implementation of those instincts is poor. In other words, they don't actually say, I'm listening to the little voice in my head and this is what I'm going to do. And I think, for example, I'll give you a perfect example of that. When everything started to go really pear-shaped, we had effectively a joyous run up to about 2007. We were knocking it out of the park. We were in this fabulous headquarters in Font House, 54,000 square feet. Imagine going from 3,000 square feet to 54,000 square feet. It was a different world. We had the best equipment, great team, really hard working culture, really good business, making loads of money. And then things started to go wrong in the economy, 2007, 2008. And it was very funny. I could feel it was different than the downturns around 2000 and the downturn. We started in a recession in 1990, so recessions were nothing new, and this felt different. And Alec McGill, my chairman, came to me and he said, Colin, he asked me to lunch, and he said, Colin, I feel this is different. I feel this is a different thing that's happening. It's not just a downturn, it's more than that. And I said, Alec, I feel exactly the same. I'm glad you said it because my instinct is it's exactly that. I said, but the problem is we're out the door busy. We've never been busier. We're working 24 hours a day. Like, you know, what am I to do? And he said, well, I'd do something if I was you. And he left it with me. And so I thought about it and I said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to actually cut headcount because we've too many people. If business drops, we're going to be in a situation where we're going to get caught. And if we don't act, something really bad is going to happen. And I had put all my effort into making what was effectively my baby, the printed image, into a really successful business. But all my eggs were in that basket. So I knew myself I needed to make it work. But the bigger thing was, how do I make the business survive if sales collapse or it really drops sharply? So what we did is we had a voluntary redundancy. And we, at that stage, we'd got up to about 130 people in the core business. We hadn't started with any of the other business at this stage. We were just design and printing mainly. And what happened was, to my surprise, 27 of the 30 people decided to take the redundancy package because they figured they'd get a job somewhere else. And they did. And they got a lump sum tax free, which they did. But there was only 3 compulsory redundancies and 27 voluntary ones. But I remember feeling like a loser at that time because it was the first time I'd taken a step back. Every other step had been a step forward, and suddenly we were making a step back. And personally, I had to struggle with that a little bit because I felt I'd let people down. I'd screwed up basically, and I was certainly feeling I wasn't as good as I thought I was, and I was really struggling with all of that at the same time. But what happened was, at the time that those people were leaving the business, they we were asking them, could they work the weekend after they finished because we were so busy that we could barely cope. And everyone thought I was absolutely mad and made a terrible decision because we were so busy and yet we were letting people off. But genuinely, I had a feeling that this was just the end of a cycle. Marketing budgets got cut, but they got cut later. And so we didn't go into the recession until basically 2009. So 2008 was a good year for us. 2009, January 2009, it was like a western. There was like stuff blowing through the factory. Everything just stopped all at once. And because we had made those cuts, painful though they were, we were able to survive that year and then get into 2010. By 2010, it was survival of the fittest. And at that stage, we had to look at wages, and we cut wages by 5%. And then at the end of that year, another 5%. But those 3 decisions, basically getting our workforce level down and then taking top to bottom pay cuts, those 2 things put us ahead of the game. So we survived into 2011, 2012, and we ended up in a situation where we were much better suited to the industry. And also, a lot of our competitors had closed. So it was much easier in 2012 and 2013 to basically make a living.
You said you felt like a loser,
Yeah.
right? And you're kind of personalizing that decision. But it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. Like to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever heard, aside from Michael Smurfett, who said that when the internet came out, he went into an internet cafe in London, and they had been doing newsprint. That's what they had been printing paper for newsprint or whatever. And all of a sudden, he said, "We're getting out of the news business," and everyone was like, "What are you talking about?" He was like, "It's gone. You know, we're at the peak." Aside from that, I don't think anyone has ever told me that they've made a decision like that to go a few steps back in order to go
Yeah.
forward when things were actually booming. Did it feel wrong at the time?
The little voice in my head said, "This isn't a recession. This is a really, really serious thing. There's more to this than we've seen, and it's going to get worse, much, much worse." And it was horrendous. And honestly, anyone who lived through it in business and survived it will tell you the same thing. It was unbelievably hard. I stopped listening to Morning Ireland in the morning and started listening to Lyric FM, which I used to think that would be like the last thing I would ever do. But I actually started listening to Lyric FM because I couldn't take the news and then go in with a smile on my face and try and get people motivated to give me their best for the day. I just couldn't do it. And I remember my accountant, Paddy, who was a brilliant accountant who really helped me all the way through my journey. He said to me he would only see one client in the morning and one client in the afternoon because he couldn't see any more misery than two. That was all he could do because he said it was so bad for some of his clients, some of the people that had lost everything. Luckily, bar buying a factory, we hadn't got into the property business in a way that others had. People ran really good hardware stores, and their local bank manager was saying, "You need to basically sell that business, sell the building." And they got them into the property game in different ways. Their own fault. They were looking for profit. Nobody owes you a living, and nobody can force you to do something you don't want to do. But the amount of good people that ended up in terribly bad situations because of poor decision making, are seeing everyone else making money on the sides and thinking, "I'm going to get into that." And it's such a shame because lovely businesses went out of business for the only for that they got into property, and it killed them at the same time. And I have to say, I did lose some money in shares because I had ended up in a situation where when we had a spare cash, sometimes I used to buy Bank of Ireland or AIB shares. And at the time we were caught with AIB shares, and they went from literally from something to nothing. And I had to apologize to my board for that one big error. But I do believe what we did was we took the hard decisions quickly. And if I have any advice for anybody who's building a business, if you think you can avoid hard decisions and build a business over a long term, you just can't. And be quick to make hard decisions, because in the end, they're awful, they're terrible, but when you've done them, the benefits should be there and you can grow back. And we grew back. We grew back as a business, and we ended up with a whole lot of other businesses. There was a lot of things, good things came out of that. And I genuinely think had we not done it, I certainly wouldn't be talking to you.
Was there any other crises? So that's a kind of a 17-year period,
Yeah.
right? From 1990 to 2007, if my
Yeah,
maths
yeah,
are
yeah,
correct,
yeah,
right? Was there anything else in between that time,
yeah.
or was it kind of all up to the right?
No, we did well most of the time. We made money every year for 29 years in a row. Managed to lose money in year 30, which killed me, but it's the truth. And it was my mistake as well, which is even worse. But the bigger issue was, yes, there was downturns through it. So we started in a recession. That was a good thing. Starting in a recession is a good thing because whatever numbers you have, they'll get better. And as things improved through the 90s, we improved. Then around 2000, everything went really stinky. And the bug, the millennium bug and all that sort of stuff. Basically about 2001, the internet bubble burst, and it was really bad for about a year. But we were always able to say, like, we were always able to find new customers. We were able to do marketing and sales. I'd come up with an idea and we'd implement it, or we'd start by actually what used to happen a lot of the time was people would say, "Colin, start banging on the doors and ringing people," and that's the way you used to do it, was pick up work. So you'd get better at new business development really quickly, and you could fill gaps. And if I could give anybody any advice about running your business, be very good to your suppliers, because they're going to be good to you. And honestly, the idea that you can work, screwing people here, not paying people here, it's nonsense, absolute nonsense. If you want the best of the other guy's game, treat him fairly, treat him right. And that's what Coca-Cola were doing. And actually there was other customers like Cadbury's and Heineken. They were just incredibly good companies, and they really treated you like you were important, that you did matter. I hated as we commoditized and people started treating you like you didn't matter. And I really hated the fact that we suddenly were, expendable in a way that, like, you'd put 15 years into a relationship and suddenly they didn't really care about it anymore. And you're kind of going, that's not the way it should be. And I have to say, I did find that annoying. And I think that's the reason I'm not in the print business now, because I genuinely felt a little bit like we weren't that important anymore. And I thought, if we're not going to be that important, maybe I'm not the right guy to run this business, and maybe there's better people to do it. And that's what happened. I sold it to a management team who were able to run it much tighter and much better, in my opinion. They made it into a smaller business and they've done really well with it. And I'm delighted it's still going. I'm delighted it's doing as well as it is. And I love seeing their marketing and I love hearing their stories about winning stuff. I genuinely take pride in it, but I know it's not me anymore. You know what I mean? It's someone else.
Perhaps it's hindsight, right? But when you're kind of looking back and talking about it, you're speaking very fluently about it. Uh, you can kind of line things up. I'm kind of interested in. I suppose it wasn't always that way, right?
No.
At one stage, you must have been quite green, and I noticed that you've done quite a bit of education. So you were the Leadership for Growth program. You're an EY Entrepreneur of the Year finalist a number of years ago. Um, I suppose how much of it is that the voice in your head and how much of it is the kind of learnings along the way?
That's an excellent question. And what I would say to you is, I made a lot of mistakes along the way in those years. I was pretty forgiving of myself, if I'm honest. So I would always say, move on. I wouldn't spend time dwelling on it. I'll tell you a funny story, actually. I'm a big believer in well done as being two really important business words in business. Really important. I think Alex Ferguson in his book, and I read a lot over those years, by the way. And Alex Ferguson, I'm a huge Liverpool fan, so it was really hard to read Ferguson's book, but it's a good read. And what I would say to you is, he says the two most important words are well and done. And I have to say, use them wisely, because if you're thanking the wrong person, or you're giving credit where it's not due, you're going to screw up your business. You're going to screw up your culture. And I'll tell you a story about one of my many screw ups, just a small one. But basically, what happened was, we needed to get people in on the Saturday. We often worked on a Saturday when we were really small, but we never brought the girls who did the finishing and the quality control. We never brought them in. So we brought them in on a Saturday because we had a deadline for a job that had to be out at lunchtime on the Saturday. And so on the Monday, I went out onto the factory floor and I went to one of the girls, with two girls, Betty and Joanne. And Joanne was this lovely, beautiful red-headed girl. She was really lovely, but she was very shy. And I said to her, thank you, Joanne. Thanks for coming in on Saturday. Anyway, so 3 hours pass and she comes into me in the afternoon and she's got tears in her eyes and she says to me, Colin, please don't ever thank me again. And I said, oh, I'm really sorry. And she goes, please don't ever do it. And I went, okay, sorry, what happened? And she said, they've just, since you left the factory floor, it's thanks Joanne for going to the toilet. Thanks Joanne for eating your lunch. Thanks Joanne for breathing. And they all felt they'd come in on a Saturday. I hadn't thanked them. I thanked her. And they were kind of a little bit, not resentful, but certainly teasing her about it. And she was the type that didn't want to be teased. But the point I'm making is, I should have thanked everyone or no one. I shouldn't have gone and thanked one person over another. And small little stuff like that matters. And as you go and you learn, you get better at that and you realize that's not the way to do it. So, for example, I would always be very careful about who actually did the work. So say my finance director came and gave me something. I'd like to know whose work that was, so that I would make sure that I could judge it that way. And I wasn't a huge fan of people claiming credit for other people's work, those kind of things. But to answer your question, I know I'm not I'm a work in progress. I'm not the finished article. And I absolutely dealt with it like that. So coming out of 2012, when we'd had that difficult time and come through it, I was very restless. I didn't want to go back to where we were in 2007. I wanted to learn and do something differently. And I went and did Leadership for Growth, which is a brilliant course. And if you're lucky enough to ever get a chance to get on it, it is by far, EI is by far their best course. And so I went over to Lausanne in Switzerland for 3 weeks, a week at a time, over 18 months. Met some brilliant entrepreneurs, loved it, really loved it. But the big thing for me was, it taught me standing still was a disaster. The first case study we did was Kodak. And Kodak developed the digital camera, but they buried it because they didn't want to kill their film business, which was making a fortune. And they decided that digital camera will come in years to come, but we're not going to do it because we don't want to kill our film business. And so basically that whole business, which I read about in college as being a phenomenal business, Kodak, one of the world's biggest brands, basically went bust, even having the new technology in-house, because they didn't realize that change was part of it. And actually, one thing I'd say about change, I've said this before many times, the only humans that like change are babies with dirty nappies. The truth is, change is difficult. It's hard. It's hard for the boss. It's hard for the people that are there. For example, none of my, well, not none of them, but most of my senior management team didn't love what was coming out of leadership for growth. You know what I mean? They seemed like they did, but I don't think they did. Some of them certainly were very uncomfortable by it because they saw it as what it was. It was going to radically change the business, and it radically changed the business. And I think for the better. And then when I got the chance to join EO, which entrepreneurs organization, I saw that as an opportunity to maybe learn and develop and get better. And I think I did. And then with Entrepreneur of the Year, which has a very good alumni, that all opened up a whole series of different things. So I think in those situations, there were real efforts on my part to accept the fact that one, old solutions will not solve future problems. And two, if you're not learning, I definitely think there's something wrong with you. If somebody said to me, and one person did, when I offered them maybe going on an MBA or thinking about doing an MBA, they said, look, I've done enough study. I know enough. I don't need to learn anymore. I thought that was a very poor answer, and I wasn't impressed by it. I didn't say anything, but I wasn't impressed by it because I think anyone that gets an opportunity to learn something should take it. I had another guy work for me, and he's very funny now. He's running his own business. I just actually nominated him for Entrepreneur of the Year, and he didn't get on the final. He's a good guy though, and I hope he gets there. But every time I got him a chance to do anything like videography or anything, he'd take my arm off for it because he knew he was going to be his own businessman. He had a plan, even though he wasn't talking about it, and he was very ambitious. So he did everything he could to up his skills. Then he moved on to our competitor and he did exactly the same thing. So when he started his business, he had endless amounts of knowledge. And again, he was clever enough to do it on another person's book in terms of doing it on someone else's employment and then being ready to start his own place. And he's knocking it out of the park with his own business.
Take me back to the acquisitions.
Sure.
So let's just get a little bit technical for
Sure.
a minute. There was the culture side of things, which I think a lot of, well, certainly now I think people are becoming more conscious of it, right? That mixing two cultures can be challenging. What were the other parts of it? The financing and
So,
everything.
I would say two things about buying a business. Actually, buying and selling businesses are very funny. They're quite unique and different skills. So when you're buying a business, the key is that you don't buy a bad one or you don't buy it for the wrong price. So what you have to do is you have to find a company that you admire from the outside. And then as you get closer to it, spend as much time as you can with the management team, especially the owner, founder or owner in a small business or an SME, that's normally the case, and try and get to know them as a person so that you've got a grasp of the kind of thinking that they would bring to bear in a certain situation, bearing in mind that they might be working for you for 1 to 3 to 5 years, depending on the deal. I was never a fan of anybody selling a business and shooting out the door. So anybody that wanted to leave immediately, I was going, thanks, but no thanks. I would say I looked at 20 businesses before I bought the first one. And I would say I looked at 10 businesses before I bought the second one. And in most of those businesses, something about them just didn't work for me. And it was nearly always the same thing. The owner founder just wasn't like me or wasn't aligned with what I would see as being the wrong thing to do. I might have wanted their customers, but I wasn't sure I wanted their problems or their culture. And I would say to you, when somebody's selling a business, especially if you hit a price, they're selling it because they think it's worth that or less than that. So be aware of the fact that you're probably paying top end, even if you don't think you are. And the second thing I would say is when you're buying a business, kick the tires hard and heavy, but don't think that the due diligence will get you all you need to know. It just doesn't. It will be a window into things. It will certainly be a safety check. If you find stuff in due diligence that's wrong, you run a mile or you learn things. But there's a big page at the end of a due diligence that says not my fault that if we miss something, you know what I mean? And as a result, you learn that actually what ends up happening is you're taking a chance. And at the end of it, the chances of you enforcing warranties, for example, and going after somebody because they told you a porky pie, it's quite difficult. And what I would say is it's not ideal. You don't want to be going there. So what you do is you make sure you're buying something that's better than rubbish. And that's why I always tried to buy businesses that were actually making money. I turned down an awful lot of businesses that were losing a lot of money. Why? Because I didn't think they'd be an easy turnaround. And I figured there was a reason they were losing money in the first place. And then the other thing I did, which I think is important, is I didn't really do business with people I didn't like. And I think that's important as well, because I think in the end, personal animosity can cause an awful lot of an awful lot of bad decision making. So if there's a friction, that's not a bad thing. If there's clear animosity, I think that's a really bad thing. And I would strongly advise people not to buy businesses where they don't like the person on the other side of the table. And the other thing I would say is if you're a seller, make sure you're taking a price that allows for a little bit of haggle at the end, because the idea that it will go exactly the way you want it won't be that. And something as stupid as a company car or something like that can throw a deal off. You put an awful lot of effort into doing a deal. And if you've gone to the nth degree and it's like not a penny less, I don't think you're going to get a deal over the line. I'm not a fan of chippers. I don't believe I ever chipped a price. But what I would say is the other side of it is I would always have said, leave a little penny in there for the other guy on both sides, because if you don't, I think you're in a situation where something will fall over it'll fall at the last hurdle. Like I remember doing the Marksell deal, we called it the Good Friday Agreement. We were there till, I think it might have been 2 o'clock in the morning on Good Friday, 7 hour meeting going through the last bits to get it over the line. A month after we'd started legals. So there was still a long list of things we had to go through and agree at the final furlong, and if there was no goodwill in that room, there was absolutely no way that deal was being done.
This was when you were 6 million turnover
Yes,
and you were buying
exactly.
the
We were
6
and we
million.
were paying a lot of money for that business because it was a very profitable, very special business. And I knew I was paying top end for it, but I was able to finance it. And actually, funny enough, I used the finance as almost like a barometer to see if it was a good or a bad deal. So I put it to the banks as a deal, and KBC, as it was then, basically agreed to finance it. And I felt that was almost like a vote of confidence. And it was a really good thing for us to know that they would finance it. They did put a proviso that we had to cover another million that we didn't think we were going to cover. As a company, we had to guarantee it. But actually, the way I did the deal was, it was actually the company we were buying was borrowing the money, and we were standing over some of it. So it was a very nice way of having that deal done. And then the key was to pay that debt off over 5 years. And that put a lot of pressure on the business we'd bought, but we managed to do it in 4. And it was a good buy. But as I say, it was a very special company. But I'd prefer to buy a company like that rather than a company that was, say, losing 500 grand a year. And the first thing you have to do is slash and burn, where they should have done that themselves, because you're the worst in the world in those situations. You're coming in, you're buying a business. I remember I looked at an agency owned by quite a well-known businessman, and they had 70 people working for them. They should have had 20. And they were trying to sell it. And they were looking for, I think they were looking for 1 million at the time. And they said, would you buy it for 1 million? I said, no, not on your Nelly. And then eventually it came back to, would you take it off our hands? That was the kind of gist of the conversation. It wasn't exactly what was said, but it was close to it. And I said, no, because I can see what needs to be done there. And I don't want to make 50 people redundant. And I don't want to be the person who did that. So no, thanks very much. And actually, so as things progressed, about 6 months later, they just closed it.
Did you learn any of these things the hard way? So did you ever buy a business and then something went wrong where you went, that's not going to happen in my next deal, or it's not going to happen in a...
I would say sometimes I've found myself in a situation where I rarely, but occasionally, where I thought, you know what, that wasn't what I thought I was getting. And I think that's where it would be, feeling that it was maybe gone wrong, that I thought I was getting one thing and I got another. But actually, to be fair to the companies that I bought, the people involved were of high integrity. The people that were involved were of high integrity. They had built really good businesses. And take the example of Pluto. There was 2 founders in Pluto who were the best in the world, like 2 of the best people I've ever worked with. And I trusted them implicitly, and it turned out to be exactly the right thing to do. There was a lot of kind of standing off each other a little bit and kind of going, "Urgh," but actually in the end, they turned out to be really high quality people. And I think we turned out to be a really high quality um, owner of the business. And when it came to the end of the earnout period, one of the ladies involved decided to leave, and the other lady said she would stay on, but only if she was taken in as a almost an equal partner. So I had a very strong feeling that although I had bought the business once, I didn't really want to sort of give part of it away. The only way I could keep um, the person involved was to actually go as a partner, and that's what we've done, and it's worked out really, really well, and it's a super business that I'm very comfortable with. So I still think that might turn out to be one of the best deals I've ever done financially, because I think high quality people, they're not cheap. They're not easy to deal with. They tend to be problematic at times, but the other side of it is they're special and they do special things.
How does it look in practice from a kind of
Yeah.
a management or oversight? So you said you kind of leave the managing directors to it, but is there quarterly board meetings, or how do you kind of run it?
So Well, it's different with each company. I like a weekly meeting, just an update meeting, which is just a shoot the shit meeting, really. I'm a chairman now, so I like to see myself in the way that Alec would have been, basically standing back and letting people do the right things, helping them when they need it, and leaving them alone when they don't. Each business is basically run on a quarterly board meeting and annual look at the numbers and how we're doing. And then in each case, I think what I'm doing is I'm basically letting the managing director deal with the business on the day to day and the week to week, and effectively talking to me on the month to month. That's the way it works. And it works very much on a collegiate basis. It wouldn't work very well if it was very hierarchical. I don't really believe in that kind of thing in a small business. I think it's a bad idea. I mean, one of the businesses has two people in it. Like Fast is a very small business. So like I'm not going to be spending a huge amount of time second guessing Carla, who runs that business. Kathy knows her business better than I do in Pluto. She runs an unbelievably full service ad agency with some amazing creative guys, the guys that did the Guinness ad that everyone loves. And she's brought these people into the business. They're working for her. They came because of her. She's running a really, really great business. They do social, they do digital. They're really, really good. And I'd like to be helpful to her, but I don't see myself as being integral to that business in the way that she is. And then Caroline, who's just taken over for Tap Creative, they're an environmental design business. She is a qualified accountant. She knows figures backwards. The design business is new to her, but she's taken to it like a duck to water. And surprise, surprise, the numbers are really good. So my job there is to give her the confidence to say, just because you don't know a business doesn't mean you can't run a business. I'm quite confident that I could run a business in different areas that I've never been in before. Why? Because the fundamentals are the same. Are you selling well? Are you delighting the customer? Do you have good people, or do you have people that maybe aren't as good as they should be? Have you motivated them properly? Are you paying them properly? Have you got the team all knowing what they're doing? It's not complicated. If you're in a situation, I went to one of my friends who worked in a very big business and is now a non-executive director in a few companies. And I said to him, I'm very frustrated. Middle of last year, I said, I'm very frustrated. I can't seem to get the profitability that I want out of one of my businesses. And he said, well, you know what, whose fault that is? And I said, yeah, I do. And he says, your fault, because you haven't made it clear enough to the people working in that business. This is what they need to focus on. This is what they need to prioritize. And I kind of felt I knew this. I needed to hear it. It wasn't nice to hear it because you hear it from somebody you admire and you're trying to impress a little bit. And it ended up in a situation where I go, that's always the way. In the end, is the business clearly focused on its objectives? Does everybody in the business know what you do? Does everybody on the business know you're sales hungry? Does everyone know that bringing in a new client is vital to the business? Does everyone care about the brand and how they actually deal with each other? Do they treat each other like ladies and gentlemen? There's a lovely business, Ritz-Carlton, and they say we're ladies and gentlemen dealing with ladies and gentlemen. That has a complete undertone, which is about treating each other with respect, but also expecting your customers and your suppliers treated with respect and giving respect. So if you've got a culture like that, I don't know any business that won't succeed. I genuinely don't. And if it's a sales problem, get out and sell. If it's a marketing problem, come to us and we'll knock it out of the park for you. We'll completely change your brand. We'll add to the strengths of your business. You tell us what we want and we'll deliver it for you. But if it's a production problem, if you're not producing particularly well, fix it. It's not like, otherwise somebody else will eat your breakfast. It's not complicated. Business has always been the same. The best people in your industry will be really successful. Have you ever seen a town where there's one pub is mad busy and the other pubs aren't? Like, I've seen towns all over Ireland where there's one pub that's knocking it out of the park and there's two or three that aren't. The guy who's running the business that's knocking it out of the park is doing something that the others aren't. I don't know what it is. Like it's I'm not in the pub business, but what I would say to you is I'd say it's probably staff. I'd say it's food. I'd say it's the vibe in the place is kind of friendly and nice and everyone feels good. And suddenly when you're choosing out of five pubs, I'm going to this one. And then more people than not are choosing that one. Now, eventually that becomes too crowded and too hassly and then another one has a chance. But my point is, it's not that hard to shine in a business as long as you're saying to yourself, it's my responsibility. I'm going to make it happen. And I'm going to do everything I can or change everything I can until I get it right.
It was interesting when you said there that, you know, as soon as a year ago that you had this frustration
Yeah.
about not being able to get the profit. And I sometimes can trick myself when I'm sitting in front of someone who's had a career like yours. I think this person has no problems. They have made it. You know, in my book, you've made it, right? And I'm sort of interested. Does it ever kind of feel like that to you?
No, and I genuinely think it if you're in a situation where you think that a business will reach a point where everything works and that will stay the same, you're mad. You're absolutely mad because you're totally underestimating the other guys. The other guys will make it work better than you if you just sit there and do it. And I do this slideshow for students who come over from the States and all over. EY drag me in and I kind of tell them a bit about ourselves. And actually all I do is I show slides and I hate PowerPoint. So I show slides of animals, and one of the animals I show is a big fat pig in a big mucky basin. And I go, that was us in 2007. And it was going to be us again in 2012 and 2013. But I wouldn't let it happen the second time because I didn't like what happened the first time, where we were just basically making too much money, not making too much money, but making a lot of money and not being innovative enough. And what I would say to you is business is always a challenge. It's a fight, it's a scrap, it's a competition. And if you sit back like a team in a league, if you sit back and go, we're the champions, we're great. What happens? Look at Liverpool this year. I'm a huge Liverpool fan. Breaks my heart to see it, but we're getting our ass kicked because we won last year and we didn't do enough right this year to make it happen a second year in a row. And I think business is exactly like that. So don't look at anybody and think they don't have problems. Trust me, they have problems. And that's the same for big businesses and small businesses. I know some very big business people and I know some very small business people, and they all lose sleep at night when they're passionate about their business. Simple as that.
What about money? So I'm sure it got to a point where at least the money wasn't so much of a problem. And what was that point for you? Can you remember it?
So it was never a point where I just go, I don't have to work ever again. I'm still not at that point. But what I would say is I was confident enough that I was building towards something that I would be able to do what I wanted. And I'm now at that stage where I'm able to do pretty much what I want to do. So I want to be involved in business. I don't want to retire. I want to keep going. I actually think I've got one more good business in me, but that's another day's work. But what I would say is I'm definitely enjoying my life more than I ever have. I've more time on my hands, but I don't think it's the point. It's funny. I've seen people that have something, and you think that was enough, and then they're looking for more. They're looking for different. I think in the end, to be honest with you, money is not that important in the drive thing. It's not about that. It's about actually, could you make a successful business? Could you grow it, and then you get to reap the rewards of it. But I've sold now 3 businesses to management teams. Um, and that certainly wasn't the most profitable way to exit the businesses. But I'm happy that those management teams own those businesses. So I'm not saying I took a major bath or it was a charity job, not at all. But what I would say is in each case, the right people own that business now. I was the right person to own them for a while, and now they're owned by other people. And I'm lucky I've got a great wife and a great family who keep me very grounded. And there is an old adage, you only wear one pair of shoes, to be honest with you. Make it a nice pair of shoes if you've got a few bob, but you don't need 20 pairs of shoes. You know what I mean? And if you've got 20 pairs of shoes, knock yourself out, but that wouldn't be me.
What have you sacrificed? Do you feel like you've sacrificed anything along the way?
At time. So when I did EO first, they used to make you draw this circle and you'd kind of put your slices for things. And I had a 90% slice for work and a 9% slice for family, and then nothing in outside of business, and then a 1% slice for friends. So I've totally changed that pie now. Like I see an awful lot more of my friends than I used to do. I see a hell of a lot more of my family than I used to do. So time was what I gave up to be successful. But I always made an effort to try and be home to eat dinner with my kids. And God love them. The poor kids were starving at 7:15 sometimes. And my wife, what used to happen sometimes was, and I was thinking about this when I was driving in about whether I'd say this or not, but sometimes I would get involved in a problem at about 5 or half 5, and I'd get so into it that my wife would ring on the phone, and I was supposed to be home for dinner at 7 o'clock every night. That was the deal. And I'd look at the phone and it'd be like 10 to 7, and I'd go, I'm in the car, darling, I'm in the car. And I'd lost an hour and 15 or 20. I think it's part of the dyslexia, or maybe it's ADHD, undiagnosed ADHD, what everyone seems to have. But I would lose myself in the problem and totally lose track of time. So I would shoot home and the poor kids would be all starving there, waiting for their dinner. But the great thing for me was that I have a brilliant relationship with all three of my kids because I did that. I could have opened in the UK and maybe been successful there, but I would have taken even more out of my family life. Whereas I mentioned to you about going to the park and stuff like that. I was able to take my weekends with my family. And now they're a bit older and they're doing their own careers. I'm so glad I got that time with them because I wouldn't have got it. And maybe wouldn't have the relationship I have with them if it had all been business, business, business. And I think the super successful people take a real bath in terms of time. Like it's a really difficult thing to get right. I genuinely think I got it about right. I was absolutely focused on my business, and the only other thing I really had time for was my family.
When you first drew that 90%, I was thinking not one person has said that to me that it's possible to actually build a successful business without really focusing on it, right? Probably to the detriment of a number of other things. What's your opinion? Do you think you could have gotten it to where it was at that point by the time you started changing it?
Maybe better organized people could have, but I couldn't have. So, in other words, I wasn't like, for example, guys used to ask me for to play golf, right? And I was a bad golfer, but I loved playing golf and I loved being out and about. And so I'd say, yeah, 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 I'd play. But then what would happen was it was a 4 hour block in the middle of the week when I didn't know what was going to happen. So by lunchtime, I'm looking at it going, it's just not possible and I'd have to cancel. So they stopped asking. And I basically am the worst golfer you've ever seen in your life. And that is not false modesty. That is absolutely true. But what I would say is, I took the decision that work was too important to me. So when I go off on a football trip or a rugby trip with the lads and we'd all get hammered and we come back, I'd go straight from the airport to work. Like, and it was actually my friends who told me. I didn't really remember that, but my friends would go, the amount of times, Colin, we'd go to the pub to get a cure, and you'd go straight to work and you'd just work and then go home. Like, that's, to me, was just natural. It just felt natural because I was working for myself. And that's probably why I strongly recommend people think about working for themselves. That wasn't an effort. That wasn't a problem for me. It didn't feel like I was sacrificing anything because I was doing something that I loved. And I think if you love your business and you're passionate about your business, you're probably going to give it more than you should in terms of time. So something has to help you keep saying. In my case, it was my wife. But what I would say to you is, you have to have somebody there saying, no, stop. You don't do this. Like, I know if I'd emigrated on my own, I would have been doing 60 and 70-hour weeks if I was starting my own business. I was abroad. I saw it with my own father-in-law. He went to England to work and he was working 50 or 60 hours because he hadn't had nothing to go home to. You know what I mean? I think that's one of the reasons people are very successful when they travel, because you really focus on your job. I think I was in a situation as self-employed. Like, I just said to myself, I'm going to make this happen. And fear of failure was huge for me. I was determined that it wouldn't fail. And that to me was something that drove me from minute one to, I wanted to go home and my wife to be proud of me and my family to be proud of me. I didn't want to face my dad and go, actually, remember the way you've had a great career? Well, actually, mine's gone a bit pear shaped. I didn't want those things. So I worked really hard to make sure they didn't happen.
Is it still there, the fear of failure?
Yeah, 100%.
Never goes away.
Never goes away. And I genuinely think the idea that you feel contentment, that you just go, it's all done now, it just doesn't. I don't know why. It just doesn't. And I'd love to tell you why that is, but that's just the way it is. I would always get up in the morning and go, can I do something better? Can I do something useful? As I say, I genuinely think I would love to be helping businesses now. So what I'd love to do in the next phase, I'm 60 now, 60 to 70, I'd love to be a non-executive director at any level, small, medium-sized businesses, don't care. I would love to be doing that and helping people basically do what I did. And that's what I would see as the next challenge. But I guarantee you, I'll be worrying about those businesses as if I owned them. You know what I mean? It's just in me.
Colin Culliton, it's been a pleasure having you in. Thank you so much. I've one more question
Sure.
before we finish up. And that's, you mentioned you still think you've got one more big business in you. Is that, have you put any thought around that, or
I had an idea a while back about car washes in golf club car parks, and I thought that was a great idea. But my kids tore it apart at a dinner table and told me all the reasons it wouldn't work. So I'm still thinking and I'm still looking at it. But actually, what I'll probably end up doing is I'll see something that's been done badly, and I'll go, I could do that well, and try and involve myself with younger people that could actually take that on and do it well. And I wouldn't be doing it for any great financial reward. I'd be doing it to make it a success and be able to say it's successful. So it wouldn't bother me if it was a restaurant or if it was a bar, both of which are incredibly hard to make money in, by the way. But something like that maybe, or something that I just feel I could do something a little better than the other guy, or there's an opening in a market that maybe we could fill. And I'd love that to be something international, something that we could basically scale.
Colin, thank you very much for coming in. It's been a pleasure. I've learned a huge amount, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. So
Thank you
thanks
very
again.
much. It was an honor to be asked, and I hope it does well for you. Cheers. Thank you.